إحنا بلديات. We are from the same country. He, a Jew from Cairo, and I, an Armenian from Cairo. Now I have found the second person that I could say we are بلديات. But what strikes me is about Egypt is that we often refer to Islamic continent. I differ with your Hassan al-Banna. I actually respect Hassan al-Banna. He represents the conservative view that sees values as something that modernity ignores. So in view of this, maybe the universal understanding of who you are and who I am is one that has to question the fear of Islam. I don't fear it.
You know, I feel extremist Islam. I mean, and I don't know, I mean, I am sure, I mean, Hassan al-Banna did a lot of good things for Egypt, you know, in terms of social programs and building hospitals and schools and all of that, but he did side with Hitler and hated the Jews, or at least took on that value of hating the Jews. He's the one who distributed Mein Kampf in the streets. He's the one who threatened and placed bombs in Egyptian homes and businesses. So it's really hard actually to like the guy, at least for me. And he is basically the father of the Muslim Morsi. I mean, you know, that's the lineage.
I never feared Morsi either. I fear the military fascists a lot more. Sisi is the equivalent of Pinochet. With the military takeover and all that, that's the death knell of any type of positive development that took place in Egypt with the uprisings against the Mubarak regime. I do fear the lack of a public space for debate in Egypt. We don't have that debate. I welcome that despite the difficulties, we have now new films coming out by younger people retrieving Jewish history in Egypt. That's salutary. You've seen some of the films I'm referring to. Yeah. You know. So I feel.
But I'd like to remind you that actually the film was banned by the Muslim Brotherhood.
Of course,
okay,
of course. So. Yeah. So 56 is also a year that your family flees from Egypt. You have no choice. You leave it. Talk a little bit about 56 in terms of. We both experienced it differently. I'm a few years older than you. You left, we stayed longer, and then we left in 63 for similar reasons, as Armenians living in Egypt.
Yeah, I should have said that, you know, it's not just the Jews who left. I mean, the Jews were forced to leave. But indirectly, all of the foreigners, you know, and they were huge. I mean, there were 300,000 Greeks. I mean, there were huge communities of foreigners in Egypt, the Greeks and the Italians and the Armenians. And they all left. And they did not all leave because Israel was created. You know, they left because Egypt was becoming a nationalistic country, and they made it very difficult for foreigners to work there. They created certain laws where a business, for example, could not have less than 75% Egyptian nationals, you know, so board of directors could only have one foreigner. I mean, those kind of laws that made running a business basically impractical. So, and that's why we left eventually.
Well, I mean, we left for a variety of reasons. What I'm interested in then, 56 is really probably more an occasion for you to reconstruct memory than to relive memory. Right? You're creating your own memory base. What are you planning to do with it?
I knew you were going to ask me this question.
I warned you, right?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about writing a second book, and this one will take place in 1956. That's when Egypt became serious. That's when Egypt said, basta. No more foreigners. We don't want any of them. Before, I mean, even before 52, 53, I mean, there were issues, but by 56, they expelled all the foreigners. They did not want them. And in terms of my family, my director family, we were just told leave, and we were not put into jail. But my extended family, unfortunately, did go to jail many times over. Some of them were abused, and I've heard horrible stories about a number of them that actually committed suicide, girls that they in turn preferred to throw themselves from stairs and die rather than be molested. And I can tell you really very sad stories where Egyptian officers made two brothers do you know what in front of them. I mean, it was pretty bad, and I'm just shocked by the fact of that, how we used to coexist very nicely. I mean, my parents had many friends who were Muslims and doctors, Jewish doctors who treated everybody, Copts, Muslims, Christians, anybody who came to the hospital, how overnight, basically, they turn on them. It's just something that is very hard for me to understand.
We discovered about an hour ago that our family doctor was your uncle, Dr. Ghibli. And he's one of the people who refused to leave Egypt, and he went to prison multiple times and harassed by the security services. I'm curious though, what prompts you, now this is your finished law, to retrieve memory, right? To revive your connection to Egypt, which was dormant. I mean, you grew up as a French.
That's what I would say, yeah.
And all of a sudden, that's not enough. Is that a particular experience of Juliana, or is it more general?
Well, it was definitely my experience. And then it's like when you are looking to buy, you want to buy your car, all of a sudden you start noticing cars on the highway, right? I mean, you say, oh, this guy and that guy. Same thing for me. I mean, I personally started to wake up to, maybe by that time I became secure enough that I had time, I felt okay to look back. I felt safe enough to look back. But as I did, I started talking to people, and what do you know? Other people are also getting to be interested. And for a very long time, and it's not just Jews from Egypt, but all Sephardic Jews from the Arab world. A lot of people ask us, why are you silent? Why haven't you talked about your life in these Arab countries? And I mean, in my case, I did not go to Israel, where in fact many Sephardic Jews were heavily discriminated against. They saw Sephardic Jews as Arabs, basically, as primitive, as barbaric even. But so they didn't dare to make waves. They didn't want to talk about it. But Zionism was not necessarily their dream. You have to understand that Zionism was created in Europe, and it became a very strong movement because of what was happening in Europe, in Germany, in Russia, with all of the pogroms. But there were problems in the past, of course, in the Arab world, but not in the modern past, not in the last 100 years. So for us, Zionism did not mean much. But now a number of Sephardic Jews, whether because they no longer want to remain silent, they don't care, or because people like me have now come into a much more comfortable position and have time to reflect back. And we say, well, wait a second here. This is part of our heritage. And we want to remember it, and we want to cherish it. And in many ways, I feel bad that I poo-pooed it for so many years, and I felt so French, as if the Gauls were my ancestors, where in fact they are not.
It's interesting. My son is now a junior at Chapman University, wasting his time studying business. But that's another story. And we've been here in California for much too long, 10 years. You can tell I'm an East Coaster, not a California. So he came here young, he was entering the 5th grade. He finally realized last year that no matter what, his parents are of multiple cultures.
Right.
Instead of hiding from it, and I want to ask you this question in private later on. I'm referring to Juliana's daughter. And now he actually celebrates that our multicultural. And in many ways, the way I read your book, you are celebrating cosmopolitanism of the era and projecting, but wait a minute, that is as real as Islamic state today, right? In other words, that reality cannot be eliminated, but it can be revived. It can be inform us and all that. And in that sense, time doesn't stand still. New dimensions come and go, but there are some dimensions the cosmopolitan can always be re-strengthened, reanimate our understanding of the self. So I encourage you, just before we get to you now to ask questions, to look at this book as not only a historical fiction, but as a metaphor to understand the present as well. So thank you for sharing with us the book and your experiences and your universalism. All right. So now it's up to you, Jordan.
I want to ask the first question. About 20 years ago,
Yeah.
I met you and I interviewed you for a story that I wrote for the LA Times, which is about Sephardic Jews in LA telling their stories, sort of recovering their memory, or at least becoming known. And at that time, I met another Sephardic writer, Victor Pereira, and then another one, and we formed a group of Jews from the Middle East and created this arts group, which operated for several years. And I'm wondering, did that little movement that we started, was that any kind of inspiration to you to think about your roots?
You know, as we say it now, absolutely, Jordan. Actually, I have to give you credit because that was 20 years ago, and that started the awakening. That started the awakening. In terms of, wait a second here, that's where we're from. How come we're not dealing with it? How come we're not acknowledging it? And you're right, Nubar, you know, when you have parents coming from, you know, immigrants' parents, you make fun of them. I make fun of my mother's accent all the time. I make fun of her cooking all the time. And now, guess what I cook? I mean, I can't believe it.
You become your parents.
I've become my mother. It's kind of scary. As I said earlier, I decided to write a work of fiction, historical fiction, but it's still fiction. And the conflict was how much history and how much fiction. Because if you put too much history, then it's like, people say, you know, I mean, I don't want to read a history book here, and where is the, you know, where is the fiction, the emotional aspect of the story? And yet I didn't want to write too much of a fictional book because I was so, what really motivated me, what prompted me to write this were the actual historical events, which I found so fascinating. And as I was discovering them, it was like, oh my God, this is what's happening today. And so it was really that, you know, balancing the two, how much history and how much fiction. And I had to cut a lot of the history itself through that I had, because one of the main source of my research was the British ambassador's diary. I was very lucky to have had access to them, and he wrote about everything and everybody, and he wrote every day. So I know exactly what happened during at least for 4 years during the war, what was happening on a daily basis. And I had a great deal of him in the book, and he was, you know, he was so pompous and horrible, but at the same time, he was very entertaining and full of information. But I had to cut him off. I mean, I just had too much.
Is that published?
What?
His diary?
Yes, now they are, but at the time they were not. I was able to get them through someone who had access to them at Oxford and copied them for me.
Is that Sir Miles Lamkin?
Sir Miles Lamson.
Yeah, Lamson.
Yeah. Yeah, do you know, I mean, you are from Egypt.
Well, we were British Jews. I mean, my parents held British citizenship.
Yeah.
And so when you say you've got these memories, right, I'm trying to figure out what am I really, because I'm Jewish, but we're British. And when we left Egypt, I was from warm and lovely and then to gray and cold and disgusting in England, in a boarding school, you know, and I'm saying, what's so wonderful to be British? But we escaped with our skin. So this is what the more I'm going to read this book, the more I'm going to find out that, boy, we were screwed up completely.
It was really, I mean, these whole identity issues, I mean, I'm talking about my identity issues, but even for Jews of Egypt, they had an identity issues. I mean, they were born in Egypt, yet they were not really Egyptians. They were French, or they were British,
Yeah.
or Italians. My father was Italian, but yet they were not fully British,
Yes, I
French,
know.
or Italian. You know, when they spoke French, but with an accent, they spoke the terrible Arabic.
Yeah.
And it's like, who are you?
Yeah.
You know, and but we are people from the world.
Yeah, well, we survived.